So this is the hardest situation that a community can ever face. And the schools that were affected function as such community environments. They're very much a family. So the role of the counseling department, what I need to do when I get that news is I need to take as much as I can off of the people who knew the child, or we do the same thing when we lose a staff member, an adult. What I need to do and what I need to develop a crisis team to do is to be able to take on the lion's share of the burden when it comes to supporting those grieving. So there are several steps we take during this process. The most important one, of course, is to communicate with the principal, with the administrators, with the counselors prior to the news going out to the students and the families. And so that's when we develop a plan as to what they're going to look like. I provide sort of templates for how the sites are going to communicate the news to the students and the families, and then the principals personalize it. Again, that's us trying to take as much of it out of their hands as possible, because the sad thing is that, of course, there are things that only the people at the site are able to do. So when I received the news on Sunday, my next steps were sharing information that I have with the principal, so she knew that she had slightly less of a burden with what I could supply and help her with her process along the way. The next thing I did was found I found 8, but 6 counselors from nearby schools to be on hand to support if needed. I also had 2 Nidito. They're one of our community partners, and they're always willing to come in and help. So that's part of the process as well. I also spoke to the counselors at the school to see how they were, because that's an important part. We don't want the coordination of it to fall on the site counselors if they're really hurting themselves. Now, being counselors and, of course, being teachers and administrators, the majority of the time they want to be in there, right? Grieving and supporting the students and their staff members. But sometimes they don't, and so we adjust to what the site needs.
So it's a process.
It's a very extensive process, and it's a process that doesn't end. So the day of, the principal gathers the staff. So in this case that I was working with Utterback this past weekend, the principal had called all of her teachers prior, but then the majority of the staff got the news on Monday morning at a staff meeting. And so, of course, my team is there at the staff meeting to support staff, and then we divided into 3 different areas, 2 for students and 1 for staff, to have counselors available. And what that space looks like in the student space, one of the spaces has a lot of, we have these wonderful grief kits that were donated to us by Pima County Health Department, and there's fidgets, there's Play-Doh, there's big giant weighted stuffed animals, Zen gardens, tangibles, of course markers and paper, and all that stuff for the kids to engage in. And then we also offer them another quiet space if they need to just sit either with their friends or alone or talk one-on-one to a counselor. We provide that space too, and then a 3rd space for staff.
What do the students do? What are the questions that they ask? How do you?
So, in my experience with middle school and high school students primarily, and I do believe this differs with younger kids, is they don't know what to ask, and there's a lot of confusion. And so a lot of times the questions come from us to kind of get them talking. We make it a point to use the person's name a lot. We ask for happy stories. Tell me, I didn't know, I didn't know her. Tell me something about her. And then usually they start looking at each other and laughing, and I say, make it school appropriate. You know, and usually once the most effective students have been in there for about an hour or so, something magic happens, and we start to see more smiles, and we start to hear them telling stories and working collaboratively on drawings and posters, and it's the hardest thing we can do, but I know that for the adults involved, it's an honor to be in a position where we get to help. We get to help these students, these children, while they're grieving.
So I guess just give me a bottom line on the importance of these children opening up to counselors and going through the process. Give me a bottom line on that.
Students need safe adults in their life. They need to be listened to without judgment. They need to be met where they are. And that's not just counselors, that's parents, that's family, that's teachers, that's anyone in their life. Grief is different for everyone. So there is no bottom line. But feeling safe, and that they can be wherever they need to be in the grief process, and it's okay to cry, even if you're a 14-year-old boy. That's what we all can do.
And when you went yesterday, specifically to Utterback, how did the children react to the news? How did they process their grieving process?
There were a lot of tears, a lot of hugs. We did not see much in the way of anger yesterday. Various levels of sadness, from students wanting to sit alone in a corner and be pensive, to students crying and holding each other, and us holding space for them. And then of course there were groups, small groups that wanted to talk, and we would have counselors be able to facilitate those conversations.
How important is it to have the process that you just described? How important is that for students and for schools?
It's vital. It's necessary. And it's not just necessary for when it happens, it's necessary all the time, because that's what makes a student feel safe, is always having that environment, not just when there's a crisis. Something wonderful that I noticed yesterday was that every single one of her closest friends was in school. Oftentimes we see the closest friends staying home the next day. But they needed to be together. They needed to be with their Utterback family, their community. And so that's pretty special.
I was mentioning earlier that some family members are getting together for a fundraiser. And a lot of times when there's a death, you have car washes.
Mm-hmm.
That is also another way of processing the grief, is it not?
Oh, absolutely. There is this impetus to help, to support the family in any way you can. And oftentimes in youth we see writing letters of sympathy, making little small gifts for the family, and although that is of course for the family, it is in itself a very important part of the healing process. We heal by doing for others. That's human nature. So
I like that. We heal by doing for others.
mm-hmm.
Wow, profound. So, is this something that y'all are going to do like once a month, or is this, or as needed? If students feel the need to come and talk to you, they still can.
Oh yes. So when part of this process, and I said it continues on beyond the day, is making sure that the students who need various levels of support are identified, and that varies, of course, by the student. So it might be typically what happens is there will be a small group that will be facilitated over several weeks. Kind of working through the grief process. In April, all TUSD counselors are going to be trained through Tunadito in conducting one of these groups specifically. Yeah.
Sounds like another story to me. Right there.
It's sad that it's needed, but it's exciting that it's happening and that we're addressing its need. So.
How about you? I mean, you've been in this business 17 years, in this role for 4 years. I'm sure you have seen and heard a lot. How do you process it? How does it affect the counselors?
So it's something that every counselor has to go through, and for me, who I've been in some variation of this role for 20 years, and I have learned to compartmentalize. It's something that principals do as well. I'll spend a long time talking to a principal, the day before, and they're crying and it's very upset. But then the day of, I say, "How are you today?" And they say, "I'm okay," because we know we've developed the skill to be able to set a certain set of feelings aside. And so I'm in a unique position because from where I sit, I very rarely know the people that we lost. And there was certainly a time when I cried, whenever it happened, and I do still, but I'm able to set it aside, and that comes from years of practice. Mm-hmm.
But this must be anytime anybody loses a loved one, but in this case, you lost a whole family.
A family.
That
Yeah.
must just be, and that's devastating.
We give what we have to give, and something and that's helpful for me. I'm honored to be in a position that when things like this happen, I have something to give. And so that's how I try to keep my mindset.
You have something that you have something that you can give, and it helps so many.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what you have to give keeps giving.
I hope so.
Real quick here for parents, maybe they didn't go to the counseling session, or maybe this is helping another school. What advice do you have for parents?
It's back to what I said earlier. Listen non-judgmentally. Meet your child where they are. They might grieve differently than you might. They might have different opinions on the death and grief process than you do. And that's okay. Just listen and be there.